Welcome back, everyone. It is Wins Above Fantasy, episode 130. Today is Thursday, March 14th, which means it is our last WAF show before baseball officially starts. Thrilled to be talking baseball with you guys as always, especially during the heart of draft season. Got an awesome show today talking Flyers beyond pick 200 that are endorsed by Wins Above Fantasy. I'm Van Burnett, joined as always by Steve Giswelli. Steve, it's time of change. I finally got rid of my 12-year-old laptop. We also are streaming for the first time ever. So in addition to finding us on Twitter at Wins Above Pod, you guys can also find us on YouTube by just searching Wins Above Fantasy, right, Steve?
Yeah, that's our YouTube channel name, fittingly.
Yeah.
We'll be live on Twitter. This is streaming, or X, as some people call it. I'll still call it Twitter. I still call it Miller Park and everything
Miller
like that.
Park.
Yeah.
Am fam.
So exactly. Yeah, not going to be me. But yeah, you can see us on our Twitter feed, on our YouTube channel. So yeah, we'll be doing some cool stuff. It's cool to get some video involved in this, and been looking forward to this for a while. And it's our last episode before we have real baseball, right? So it's a nice time to implement this. This is like our spring training, right? It's our first stream. We're not gonna go, 6 innings or anything like that. We're like, coming in for we're at 3 innings at this point in March, right? So
Just getting
we
stretched out. We
it's getting
might pull.
stretched
We
out.
might pull it all together. And episode 1 will be episode 2, and we'll get all confused. We are in uniform though, Steve. I am rocking the shirt you gave me,
Oh yeah,
the 80
yeah.
grade dad girl dad shirt. So love that. And what do you got? Trey Turner over there with
Yeah,
the super slide.
both
Yeah.
from RotoWear. Shout out RotoWear. Basically all my shirts come from RotoWear. It's just, why wouldn't I wear fantasy baseball themed shirts basically every single day of my life, even in the dead of winter? But now it's appropriate in March, which is great.
I love it. Well, Steve, I know we got all of our drafts in action. They're starting to wrap up. My home league is next week, so 1 week away. Yours is a couple weeks after. You're after the Soul Series, but today we are talking sleeper picks. I know there's just so much going on the site right now. Nick Pollock released his latest list, the all important famous list, which has a lot of updates. So go out, check that out. Keep or Cut did the spring training, kind of keep the stat or cut the stat, which was the topic that we were exploring. But this one's nice because usually our targets are in certain categories. We don't do sleepers all that often. I've heard sleepers be defined as kind of, late as in after pick 200. So we changed the word to Flyers, but give me a little insight on this other than the fact of that, once all bets are off and it's late in any draft, you can grab these guys in almost any round as long as it fits your team need. But would love to hear you talk about the topic a little bit before we get into what's probably 10, 12 guys. So big show today.
Yeah, I sort of view this as guys that I'm interested in taking in like the last 2 rounds of like my 12 teamer, or as back end starters that are maybe guys that might be your fifth or sixth starter, or like a starter on the bench in deeper leagues, or like outfield 4/5 territory, guys that you potentially could move on quickly if it doesn't work out, but have upside that you kind of want on your roster, that I view as like sort of almost like an ad in season,
Yeah.
that you kind of want to hold on to and see if it works, and be ready to move on quickly. Sort of like streaming a hot bat until it sort of fades, or just a starter that has 2 or 3 good matchups coming up and you just want to ride it out, and if they don't go as well as planned, you sort of move on. So guys that you don't want to tie yourself to, because there are other quote unquote sleepers, right, that you could take much earlier in drafts, but you're sort of more invested in them. Like, I don't know. Cole Reagans is beyond a sleeper at this point. I think he went around pick 70 in one of the main events last night, which is just absolutely insane. I remember I saw Gray and Beat on it. Rasball put out a tweet that like how excited they were to draft Cole Reagans because no one's really paying attention. It's in August and September when he's doing all these good things. And then now it's like, yeah, we're gonna have so many shares, but now it's like, no, we have no shares because the price is just so high.
Yeah.
So like there are quote unquote sleepers like that, which is why it's I think important to define it. So we're just really looking at end game targets for like shallower leagues, and then like guys that will be sort of on your bench slash main roster for like the 15 team or deeper leagues that have upside.
Yeah, that's fair. So, just some housekeeping stuff, guys. We're back on the weekly schedule. We'll still be putting it out on the normal Spotify recording, but also have the option to catch us on the live stream when we do these on Wednesday nights. Most often, we'll tweet it out. We'll try to give you guys a heads up when we're about to record. But next week's episode, we are going to be looking at players we have the most shares of, and then on March 28th, which will be the full on opening day, that Thursday show will be a special one because we're not only going to do our annual chalkboard picks where we, plant a flag in the ground on who our targets and fades are, but we have a special guest joining us to do the same for the first time ever to join us on the chalkboard. So that's what's coming up. But this show, as mentioned, is talking Flyers. So before we jump in, Steve, we got some news on the hot stove here. Dylan Cease traded to the Padres. Nice little landing spot for Drew Thorpe. And is it Jairo Iriarte? Not sure if I'm saying that right. But talk to me about this Cease landing spot. I don't have many shares. I think the format I would roll with him in would be best ball, so you can dodge the clunkers but get the good strikeouts. But I know Cease a few years back was your boy. You called that at the right time and faded it at the right time. What do you think this does for his stock moving to the Padres instead of the dumpster fire that is the White Sox?
I think his ADP will shoot up here. I know we normally don't do like breaking news just because there's so many shows that cover that, and we're a weekly show, so it's not really relevant at certain times. But I mean, this trade like broke like literally an hour or so before we got on the air here, so I think it's relevant to talk about.
Yeah.
I liked Cease at cost. I think it was a bit too harsh of a fall. I know he was sort of being drafted as an SP1 after his amazing 2022, and it was pretty bad other than the strikeouts last year. But where he was going at pick like 114, he's going to pick 112 in the month of March. I'm sure that's going to creep up, considering he's now in a great park to pitch in, just a good environment overall.
You think he jumps ahead of like Joe Musgrove, Justin Steele?
I don't know. I think it'll be closer. He's definitely going ahead of guys like Sanger right now, who's above him, who's hurt, right? I think I would take him above Justin Steele at this point. I think
I
there's
agree. I don't know about Musgrove,
I
but
think
yeah.
there's similar players, and I think Cease has a little bit more upside, whereas Cease's value was an SP1 in 2022, right? He didn't back it up with a performance, but I think Justin Steele's upside was last year, where that was more in like the SP2 range. I know, sort of talking in generalities, but Cease does have 3 pitches. I know he didn't really have command of any of them last year, but he has the fastball velocity. If he can get that curveball back and that amazing slider that he has, like that's when he could be a pitcher with a 3 ERA and potentially could lead the league in strikeouts. Like the downside was last year, which is still really valuable because he had 189 Ks or 214 Ks and 177 innings. Like that's still really good. Like he just needs to shave like a half point to like 70%, 70 points off that ERA to get below 3, and he's still really, really good. And going to San Diego from Chicago that's a start.
Yeah, much better ballpark context. And don't forget Ruben Niebla is the pitching coach out there in San Diego, who's a guy that was kind of the pitcher whisperer when he was with Cleveland for all those years. And it seems like they've just kind of had some tough luck with like injuries with Musgrove. But hey, they got a Cy Young season out of Blake Snell. So we shall see what Niebla and the Padres can do for Mr. Dylan Cease. But back to the Flyers, Steve, because Cease with the 112 ADP is a little too rich for this topic. Targets beyond pick 200. We're going to lead off with a pitcher, but his ADP is a good 600 picks after Dylan Cease. It's Luis Heel for the New York Yankees that is just right up at the top of all news feeds after he struck out 8 Phillies in spring training in just 3 2/3 innings. That's 8 strikeouts in less than 4 innings in spring training. He touched 100 miles per hour at one point. Luis Heel, this was a guy we were talking about, Steve. I know the name. Eno Saris was mentioning this as a guy to watch a couple years back, and I believe he had Tommy John. Is that right? So there was a little concern that the Yankees, would of all the potential starters to backfill, especially now that Garrett Cole, speaking of breaking news, is going to miss 1 to 2 months with his, is it the shoulder or
Elbow,
forearm?
elbow,
Elbow. Sorry.
elbow. Yeah.
So now that Cole's out, the Yankees have to fill somebody in. And right now, they have that SP5 as Clayton Beater. But when you look at Luis Heel, who has 14 strikeouts in just 8 1/3 innings in spring, I feel like it's going to get real noisy in Yankee land for Heel to break camp with the team. The walks are a little bit of a concern, but yeah, the swing and miss stuff is unquestionable, and he just looked dominant. I was watching the highlights on MLB. He's a big dude, and yeah, throwing that much heat with his size as well. I think. Well, I've just drafted him in my TGFBI, which is 30 rounds. So this is I think his min pick right now, I don't have it right in front of me. Was it 430 or am I thinking of somebody else? But he is shooting up the boards. I'll pull that up. But Steve, you're closer to it out there. Is Luis Heel on your radar? Do you think he's going to break camp? What do you do with kind of this late spring training shooting star here?
Yeah, I think the min pick is 426 right now. So still really affordable, but I'm sure that'll only go up as the Cole news becomes more official. I think the last update was that he was the favorite for the spot if Cole isn't going to be ready on opening day, and now that's like a certainty. So I think that job is sort of Heels to lose, and
Yeah, I just reset the min pick for him then
oh, nice. There
in
you
my
go. So
TGFBI. Yeah, so
there you
I got
are.
him at like 360 something.
Oh, nice,
So
nice.
it's
Yeah,
going
I mean,
up.
still super reasonable, right? This is another guy that like, just scouting the minor league stat lines, like our boy Nando DeFino does in his MILB hunting. There's just some astronomical strikeout rates at like all levels, like in 48 innings in 2021 AAA at 32% strikeout rate. In 30 innings in AA that year, he had a 38.5% strikeout rate. The walks have always been a concern. Like he hasn't had a single digit walk rate ever.
Uh-huh.
So that's troublesome. But
It's
I'm
Hunter Green
willing.
at pick 350.
Yeah. Maybe with even more walks, but hopefully less of a home run problem. But I mean, it's a small sample. It's only 8.1 innings, but it's an under 10% walk rate. Like if it's under 10%, like he's going to be a good starter with that sort of swing and miss stuff. Um, it's absolutely worth the flyer, and I think an underrated aspect of the Yankees, and I know that there's a lot of pressure on the Yankees to win, and especially from their fans and around here that they could be spending a little more money as compared to what they were doing when George was around, things like that. But they've done a great job with their back end pitchers, even guys like Clark Schmidt, which was successful to an extent, but we saw Michael King at the end of last year.
Yeah.
They're good at developing these back end starters, and
Nasty Nestor.
I would
Yep.
trust them to yeah, Nestor Cortez, another guy that we're going to talk about in a little bit. They're good at developing these back end starters, and I think that Hill has the stuff to do it and has looked really, really good. And I'm pretty jealous of that pick of yours in TGFBI. Wish I would have done so myself.
Yeah, so 6'2" doesn't like jump off the page the way like a Bailey Ober or somebody does, but the extension is 6'8" on the four seamer. So that's, when you get to 7 foot, that's like Freddie Peralta range. So that fastball is already jumping on hitters, let alone when it's touching 100. So yeah, to me, like you said at the top of the show, Steven, it's going to be a broken record on this, but so many of these guys, it's like you want to try to catch lightning in a bottle. And if it blows up on you, you move on. You're almost excited to drop guys in the first 1 or 2 weeks. So I really like the fit with Luis Heel. And if you have not looked at the strikeouts, just go give it a search on Twitter X. Heel is Gil, Luis Heel. It could be a name to remember. Steve, why don't you take the next one on a flyer you're interested in?
I got another bit of breaking news here.
Hit me.
Yeah,
Look at us live
not
streaming.
not
Breaking news.
not great. Devin Williams expected to miss 3 months with a stress fracture in his back. I
Oh,
don't know if you have
wow.
any shares. I've been dipping in earlier closers, but I don't have
Wow.
Devin Williams yet. So dodge a
Yeah,
bullet
I
there.
think TGFBI is the one. I mean, that's a bummer for him too. I feel bad going
Yeah,
straight to like the fantasy impact, but that's what we do. Let me see, just since we're doing it, TGFBI. I don't think so. I think I went Helsley because he was a little bit too pricey. Yeah, I went uh Helsley and Alzolay. So I got Cardinal Cub there. Um so who will fill in there, Steve, is the question.
that's the thing. I think Abner Irbe. I'm probably saying that wrong.
Oh yeah, he was lights out
Yeah,
last year.
the
He was like
the
a ratio guy.
as far as like the Brewers, like they always have these guys that are really good in the bullpen. They're great with developing pitchers like that. And I believe we drafted him in um uh our dynasty league, but unfortunately I cut him for Bowden Francis. But
Hmm.
oh well. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's a bummer
unfortunately, yeah.
for Devin Williams.
How close are you to being up in our Raz Slam League?
Uh
'Cause that'd be a crafty
I th-
pick
I
in the
th-
24th round.
yeah, I think you might have a pick before me, but
Although
uh
honestly, the way pitchers are pushed down, there's like still closers
of
available. You know
course
what I mean?
the actionable news now comes out when we're doing our live stream, so we can't like pause to pick up a Abner on all of our teams. But
No, the show
yeah,
must go
it's
on.
Abner. I mean, and this is super early, but it's Abner Urbe, Uribe. But I mean, the Brewers should be decent at least, but um, I would bet he would be the guy to take a shot on. I mean, they also have Joel Pyampas, who's been really good. They have plenty of good options in that bullpen, but
Well,
stinks for them.
Uribe,
So,
a
yeah,
70 grade fastball slider, and he had a strikeout rate north of 30%
yeah,
last year. So yeah, that seems
that's the
like
guy you want to spec on
right.
like right now if you're
Yep,
doing
and
a draft
at
or
least
adding someone. Yeah.
talk about another guy with walk issues. Holy smokes. 16% last year and all through the minors, like 19,
can
15, 27. So, yeah,
can
that's
get
just
can get
don't
away
watch it.
with that as a reliever though a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Okay, well, let's go to our second flyer, Steve, to keep us rolling here before the baby wakes up over on my side.
Brian Bayo going at pick 228. I believe that's March ADP, right? Right, Ben. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
still affordable. Another guy that I think is like a strikeout upside guy. He's the 46th pitcher on Nick Pollock's list. He just signed a 6-year, $55 million deal, an extension with the Red Sox. So always encouraging when a team the team backs you up and believes in it. I think that's a good sort of secondary thing. That's not necessarily numbers analysis. He does have a great mix of ground balls and strikeouts. There was more focus on the slider this offseason, to attempt to get some more whiffs, which is always important. And he added a cutter to help against lefties. There's been some signs and moments where, well, especially last year, where you thought Bayo would be taking the next step and
Yeah.
becoming like a really good fantasy pitcher, only to be, sort of fooled a little bit
Yeah, he had
last
a
year.
bad back half. He kind of got
Yeah,
fatigued, he said, right? But
yeah,
it definitely fell off. He added like a full run to his ERA with like 3 or 4 starts, I think.
but that's something that you know look to sort of build on with a pitcher. Like, I don't think you would jump to sort of it doesn't scream like SP 1 or 2 upside with just a 20% strikeout rate. But
No,
I think
yeah.
there is room for more, and it doesn't even need to get to like 30 because that ground ball rate is so good. It's been, 55, 60% at like all of his recent stops. So if he can get to like a 25% strikeout rate with that really good ground ball rate, like that's sort of, I've never really been in on like Framber Valdez, but that's kind of been a blind spot of mine because I've just been blinded by the lower ish strikeout rate for an ace starting pitcher in fantasy. But
Yep.
he has 157 innings to build on and improve in his second really full year there. So I think there is some strikeout upside. At least the minor league numbers suggest that there is.
Yeah, I think in Nick's right up on the list, he closes it out calling him the mini Logan Webb, or that he could be a mini Logan Webb.
Yeah, that's a
And I
good
think
comparison.
that's a great one. But we talked about him a couple of years ago, Steve, and like talk about he's got that dog in him. Like this is a guy that Pedro taught him how to pitch. And in the interviews, they were asking him if he wants to become the next Pedro, and he's like, "No, I definitely want to be better than Pedro. I want to be in the Hall of Fame." And like he's reinvented himself multiple times. He's constantly like working. So I think what's nice about this one is you can let it come to you a bit because projections are pretty soft on him, and even that, like you said, like the savant page or the pitcher list page looks a little better because his ideal contact rate against was 12th overall in the majors last year because people just can't square up the ground balls or with all those ground balls. So adding in the slider, I think is where you can start to see the upside of, like in the minors, like you said, Steve, he had 81 strikeouts in 58 innings. Like if he can start ramping up the strikeouts a little bit, the ground ball rate's great. Keep the walks in check. Now he is having a little bit of a bumpy spring, so make no mistake, this is to go Brian Bayo, as and Nick's kind of endorsing it as well, is against what you would think from projections or spring training numbers, but people like this pitcher. That's why the Red Sox backed him. Pedro still works with him, so I'm very interested in Bayo. Is like again very very back of the rotation, and if it doesn't look good, you move on. So yeah, I think I just pulled up March ADP, Steve. It's pick 217, so not free, but I know I've seen him like fall. I haven't had to reach for him, and I've had the option for him like after ADP in drafts. So, yeah, I think it's a good one here.
Yeah, I mean, Nick likes him versus the market. Like he's pitcher 86, and sure, I know there's a bunch of relievers above, but not 40 relievers, right? So he's
Right.
definitely you know, pretty decently ahead of market value by Nick's rankings. And honestly, that's not he could do much worse than but just by drafting where Nick's rank split pitchers rather than the market. You could probably do pretty good there.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, anytime those future bets come out in Vegas, I'm usually going right to Nick Pollock as my inside source there. Moving along, we got Jack Sawinski as another target at pick 236. This is one, Steve. Outfield is just something, especially in the industry leagues, NFBC leagues, 5 outfield leagues. You find out pretty quickly that it gets thin. And I know you brought him up a time or two, but you've converted me, man. I think I've got like 3, 4 shares of Sawinski, and at pick 236, you're getting a ton of pop, but you're also getting non-zero speed. Uh, and yeah, the batting average and strikeout uh, is not ideal, but overall, this could look better for a guy who's still pretty young. And we've seen slight improvements overall, though. I think you can almost count on this guy being 25 to 30 homers, maybe more, and 5 to 10 steals, which at that point in the draft is great. But talk to me about Sawinski. I know it's a guy that you've kind of watched closely as it relates to like the plate discipline and everything.
Yeah, Saris at the Athletic has been big on him all offseason, and I've sort of been following lockstep in that. I mean, he had 26 stolen bases, 13 steals, was only caught twice in just 534 plate appearances. So, 100 or so plate appearances shy of a full season. All the projections has him for, similar numbers, 22 homers, 8 to 10 steals, but only 112 games. And sure, when you think of Sawinski, you think of
Platoon, I guess. Yeah.
platoon and K downside, but he still hit 224 despite having that 32% strikeout rate, and that's just because he hits the ball really hard. He has a 15.7% barrel rate, like can take a walk, and I think there's some room for improvement with the strikeout rate. He chased just 22% of the time, only had a 10.9% swing strike rate, which doesn't really line up with a 32% strikeout percentage. And there was a lot of peaks and valleys in Sawinski's season, and that can be looked at here with this nice rolling graph of Sawinski's WOBA versus strikeout percentage. But basically, any time that he got his K rate below like 30%, which is that red line, his WOBA shut up and was like elite. I'm not saying that that's going to be something that he can do um, consistently, but I think he has it in him, especially with like the underlying metrics that don't necessarily point to a 30% strikeout rate. I think it's honestly just a matter of being a little bit too passive. It's just a 28% swing percentage. Sorry, 48% swing percentage. So he could swing a little bit more. And he only swung at 62.5% of the pitches in zone. And it wasn't a horrible or great zone contact percentage, but it was passable at 81.4%. So I think there's room for some, a little bit more aggression, because a lot of those strikeouts are due to taking a lot of pitches. So if there is, a strikeout rate below 30%, which he did a lot in the minors, like he struck out, high 20s a lot of the time, I think you could kind of look at, maybe a 250 30-15 guy, which is, a lot more valuable than pick 236. And if that does happen, he's going to get a lot more games than the, 127 that the bat is projecting for him. Like he'll be in that that Pittsburgh lineup all the time if he can get that up, that K rate down, that batting average up a little bit.
Yeah, the OPS last year against lefties was 608, so
Yeah, it's
terrible.
tough.
I mean,
Yeah,
not great. But I think what's unique is last year that he had the 26 homers, 13 steals, a 224 average. But I'm a little surprised the projections have him as low as like 23 homers for a guy that barrels the ball like he does. Like you said, Steve, that 15.7% barrel rate. You look at his spray charts, like some of these homers look like they're like 500 feet, and yet his home run to fly ball rate is only 17%. I'm just peeking at like what he did in the minors. Yeah, 19 homers in 106 games. I don't know. I'm a believer in 25 plus. Like uh I don't think with that size and power
I
we're
mean,
gonna see.
even going back to last year, he had 19 homers and 372 plate appearances with a 12.2% barrel rate. So even if you do want to aggress the barrel rate a little bit, there's it seems like it's a 20 homer floor, right?
Yes, exactly.
And like an 8 steal floor. So even on the downside, like I think you're still getting decent value as like an OF 4 or 5, but I
Mhm.
think there's just a potential for more.
Yeah.
If he can improve that strikeout rate and does perform a little bit better versus lefties.
Yep. And just to look, yeah. So spring training so far, couple homers in 9 games. So that's what you want to see from a guy like this. Um, anything else before we keep rolling here?
No, let's do it.
Good. Well, let's stick with outfield and going over to a guy we talked about recently, but his ADP is in the 500s. However, since the news of making the opening day roster, his ADP has been cut in half. Or now you kind of got to go before pick 300. We're talking about Jackson Merrill for the Padres, who we're excited. Lefty, he's got a little bit of power, a little bit of speed. Um, nice player overall. He's working on defense. He was not traditionally an outfielder. And Jackson Merrill is hitting 351 with a 995 OPS, a couple of homers himself, and a couple of steals to boot. Merrill is interesting, Steve. I know we talked about him last week, but yeah, with this Padres lineup, kind of curious if roster resources caught up here with all these news trends. Yeah,
It should
they
be.
so they do have him.
They're pretty quick. Yeah, yeah.
So they have him at center field. He's batting ninth, so kind of that mini leadoff. Where honestly, it could be really nice for runs scored. That as soon as he gets on base, he's got Xander Bogaerts, Fernando Tatis Jr., Cronenworth, and Machado hitting after him. So I like this for Jackson Merrill. And now when you go over to some of the projection systems, it looks like, yeah, they still got him at like 110 games. But in that time, they got him 12 homers, 8 steals, and a 252 average. So if he actually plays the 140, if it's a full successful season, you work in some rest time. I know we're just kind of prorating there, but you're still looking at something like we were talking about, like high teens and low teens on homer steals, but with an average that won't kill you. And I bet he could get close to 80 runs with those guys hitting after him. But what are your thoughts on Merrill here?
Yeah, I think the projection systems are a bit low on average. I think the hit tool is the best part of his game. It's a 70 future great hit tool. Over at Fangraphs, he hasn't hit below 273 at any stops in the minors, and that was the 46 games he spent at Double A at the end of last year. But yeah, 15 homers, 15 steals across 100-ish games, 114 games at Double A and High A last year. So yeah, I don't think there's an amazing like power bat in here that's like sort of can be the I don't know breakout prospect or superstar Corbin Carroll type of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a really good hit tool and a guy that has made the opening day rosters. Told he's earned his way onto the plane. I think was their managers like comments. Take that as you may. But it's a good player, and I think that it's someone that has always had really good K rates at the minors. Isn't going to strike out much more, I think, at the major league level. And has that sort of prospect upside at a super, super reasonable price. I think in the few main events that he has been drafted in since it was announced that he made the opening day roster, he's been going around pick 200. But hey, that still qualifies for our picks, our sleepers we like past pick 200, right? You're probably pretty smart. I think Chris Towers grabbed him in my TGFBI around like pick like 300 or 400, which is a nice discount to what it is 2 weeks later now. But I think it's not really like a amazing power profile from a fantasy perspective, but definitely someone that could provide batting average help in rounds where batting average is hard to come by, and will also chip in some steals, good counting stats if he stays in the lineup, and non-zero power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the recent swath on picks is like 260 to 280. So yeah, I feel like you can get him, but that min pick of 202 for
What
Jackson there.
outfielders are going around there? Let's do some maybe
Yeah, that's a
this
good
or
one.
that, or would you rather's, right?
So going right before him is Alex Verdugo. Oh, let's see. I'm sorry. So I'm on March. Verdugo's going after that. So 260, 280. That's like, so Whit Merrifield is dual eligible. That's something I've been doing as well, is getting Whit Merrifield and then handcuffing it with Johan Rojas.
I like
Because I
that.
feel like that's, either way, you're going to get a guy who, I mean, worst case, they split, right? But if one of them runs with it, then it should give you 20 steals. Merrifield's another one who's done kind of a bet on himself type of contract. So, um, yeah, so Merrifield, and then it looks like Parker Meadows, I know is a fan favorite.
Yep.
Giancarlo Stanton, Max Kepler, though, I would take a shot of.
Yeah, I guess it depends on, a lot of this depends on like what you need, and especially for outfield, right? Like you have 5 outfield spots in NFBC drafts, and you kind of need to tailor your outfield 4 or 5 and bench outfielder to sort of your overall team needs.
Right.
So if you took some, like, if you took Ellie maybe early on and have some average volatility, maybe you would lean Merrill over a guy like Nelson Velasquez, who's more just power, or even like a Max Kepler in that situation too. But I don't know. I think it's a decent value, and someone that could be part of a pretty good lineup, and I think a team that will have a better year despite losing Juan Soto.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, going from the youngsters, we got a 3-pack of pitchers who are guys that we've all rostered at one time or another, but their ADP is just a roller coaster. We're going to assess if the discount this year is worth buying in. But first, we got to take our first ad break, and we'll be right back. So, Steve, going back out to New York here, we got Nasty Nestor Cortez at pick 263. And this is one, speaking of Nick's list, all important list, Cortez is another one who's high on the list. And I think when you're looking at Cortez, you're hoping he can get back to what he was a couple years ago. But Nick likes what he sees. He's at number 43 on this list. So just a few slots ahead of Brian Bayo. Just noting that he looks healthy. The velo is down, but overall he's healthy, and the fact that he's delivered results in the past, likes what we're seeing from Nestor Cortez. I think I might have one share of Cortez. Nothing really jumps off the page when I look at him. He's kind of like a pitcher's pitcher, right? A lot of sequencing stuff. But yeah, the whiffs are just really like spread out across the board. I guess the fastball has a higher whiff percentage than what you typically see from fastballs. But
And
yeah,
especially
obviously
one that's 91.7, right?
yeah, that's true. Yeah, opponents just have a super hard time hitting that, which I guess if you're throwing it 50% of the time and it's got a 213 batting average against, that's a pretty dang good foundation. So, Cortez, I think he's a prototypical example of what we talked about, that if you load up on some volatility early with the upside with a Yuri Perez or a Bobby Miller or Cole Reagans, you almost want to backfill them with some stability and some floor. And I think Cortez offers that when you're talking about an ADP that's 233 or in this ballpark. But what are you seeing with Cortez? Do you have any shares this year? I actually do, looking at my list. So I'm kind of on the train here for a little bit of stability, but maybe some upside as well.
I don't have him. I plan on getting him at one point. I think it's sort of one of those things that might be, you look back and it's like, why wasn't I all over this value, instead of just the recency bias of last year, which was tough. There was a lot of injuries, and it just never seemed to get on. I don't, as I search for him, sadly, on my player shares page on NFBC, I don't
got
have
one. Yeah,
oh, nice. There you go. But I think that a lot of the luck stats, I know that sometimes lazy and easy analysis, it doesn't tell the full story, but I think those were pretty poor. And on top of injuries, when he couldn't stay healthy, that sort of leads to the year that he had last year. He had a 291 BABIP and a 69.1%, not so nice left on base percentage. But the the underlying other, quote unquote lazy metrics were still pretty good. Like it was a 25% strikeout rate, just a 7.5% walk rate, which was the worst for him in the last 3 years since he's been with the Yankees, or the second stint with the Yankees. So the strikeouts were still relatively there. It was still, over a strikeout per inning. It was just pretty bad BABIP, bad left on base. The home run rate was elevated compared to last year, which sure that could be expected, but I don't think you were expecting a 2.44 ERA like he had in 2020. But also I don't think it was fair. It'd be fair to expect a 4.97 ERA like he had last year. The xERA was 3.71, and the FIP and xFIP were still lower than his actual ERA. Sierra, which I know a lot of people like the most of the ERA indicators, was 4.35. But I think that that might not account for some of the things that Nestor does well, which is like that messing with timing, the funky deliveries, that the surface numbers might not just pick up. So I really like Nestor Cortez as a bounce back, and where he's going at that range, and it passes the Nick Pollock test. He's currently being drafted after a guy like Brian Bayo, and Nick was ahead of the market on Bayo, and he's even higher on Cortez. So that tells you all you need to know from my end.
Well, a guy to segue there who is not passing the Nick Pollock test is Jack Flaherty, who I think he was my first. No, there was a Kevin Newman piece I wrote for Pitcher List in like 2018, and then it was Jack Flaherty was like my second big going deep piece. As a Cardinal fan, Steve, I wanted to believe it into existence that he would be this ace for us for decades. Did not work out. Brought a little attitude as well, which the Cardinal Nation didn't love. You and I were talking off the show. It's just been an interesting roller coaster, man. Yeah, it's been like since 2019 that he had one of the best second halves in baseball history. 2020 was weird, but that whole COVID season was bizarre, especially for the Cardinals. They might have had the weirdest run of game freezing out of anyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
2021, he came back at 3.22 ERA, 78 innings, but it was the injuries. 106 whip, strikeouts looked great. So if you remember that next year, he was still in like that third round range. And that's when the wheels came off in 22 and in 23. He's been north of a 4 ERA. He's been on and off the field with injuries. Last year, he wound up in Baltimore at the deadline. And now he finds himself in a really unique environment with Detroit in kind of that fun little motley crew pitching rotation that they got. No real risk of him not having a job out of camp. I know he had been all over the place all through spring, but today, or Wednesday as we record, had 5 strikeouts in 4 innings, 1 hit, no runs, no walks against the Phillies. So hands down the most encouraging thing we've seen from Jack Flaherty. Talk to me here. At ADP's 422, this is practically free. I do not have any shares. I was more with Nick that it just seemed like a headache. Maybe he would end up in the bullpen, especially with how good the Tigers have kind of rotation depth and potential guys with Gibson Long and Casey Mize and all this stuff. But this could work for Flaherty, and it's not a bad place to be pitching. Are you in on Jack Flaherty?
Much like you, I've always had like a special attachment to Jack Flaherty. I don't know why. He was just one of those guys that I had early on. I don't know if it was added the first year they came up, and then that 2019 season, I actually traded him at his like low point for his ERA, or high point essentially, and missed that whole second half. But still, have always had a fond attachment to Jack Flaherty. It's just been one of those pitchers that I
He
found
looks so
myself.
good when he's
Yeah,
on,
looks
man.
so good when he's on. He looks like one of those guys that you watch like with the pitching ninja highlights. Like, how does anyone ever
Yes.
hit him?
His tunneling is
Yeah.
one of my favorites out of anyone.
And Nick may have been out on him like on the list and the reps, but he did have a tweet that caught my attention. Is probably the reason why he's on the rundown. But Nick Pollock tweeted about his command today and said it was as good as he's ever seen from Jack Flaherty, and has a nice pitch plot from Savant. Just with fastballs up and sliders down in the way, just dotted perfectly. And Flaherty's also one of those guys like that fastball velocity matters for him. Like when he's low 90s, like he's not it. But he's been up this spring. He's been throwing, 90, sitting 94, back to where he was, in 2019, 2020, and 2021 when he was healthy and good. So, if he has that velocity back, is in probably the best place to pitch um, in baseball in Comerica Park. Especially if he has a few home starts in Detroit where pitchers are ahead to start the season, the hitters, and it's also cold. Like I could see Jack Flaherty getting off to a really good start if this velocity sticks, because he has all the tools in him. It's just been one thing after the other after the last few years. But I am all about taking a dart throw on Flaherty at that range.
Yeah, I mean it's the perfect dart throw. You just got to be ready to move on if it doesn't look good.
Yeah, for sure. We know how quickly it can go south for a guy like Flaherty too.
But still 28 years old. Like you said, the contract where he kind of
Contract,
bet on himself.
1 year deal. Yep.
Yep. And yeah, just looking at projections and from a volume standpoint, most of these projection systems have him at like a 150. Which
As far as innings.
yep, sorry. Um, yeah, I mean, I think you'd take that. And it's honestly, they're probably just splitting the difference because in the best year he went 196. I think it's always just been around durability and health, but uh we'll see. I mean, they would want him if because the Tigers are probably, I mean, this is a pretty good window for them. I feel like are they favorites in the AL Central or is that the Twins?
I don't know about favorites, but they're definitely a popular sleeper.
Yeah,
I think
that's
that's still by projections the Twins division to lose.
interesting. Well, moving on to the third here in our three pack of pitchers who kind of we've all rostered, we've all known we don't know what to do with them. Tristan McKenzie, a little bit pricier than Jack Flaherty with an ADP of 234. As a reminder, we saw very little of Tristan McKenzie last year, just the 16 innings before he landed on the injury list with a right elbow sprain. But the year before that was the great McKenzie year where he won 191 innings with a strikeout per inning, a sub one whip. So now basically the reason why this ADP is a little bit pricier is we're seeing Tristan McKenzie in spring training. He looks pretty healthy. Today against the Dodgers, he had 3 scoreless innings, 4 strikeouts. So looking at projections, they've got him at 141 innings. I think you'll take that compared to the Flaherty projections, though, because if McKenzie throws 141 innings, you know it's going to look pretty good for your fantasy team. He's been a strikeout an inning and at worst like low 3 or low 4 ERA for a while, and that's where they have him projected here. Whip kind of is back and forth. I know the walk rate's been shaky in the past, but in that last full season, it was a 5.9% walk rate. So just 26 years old. I know the frame is kind of nerve wracking. Just he's so wiry, 6'5" and 165 pounds. But man, McKenzie, when he's on, Steve, like this was probably a top 20 pitcher in just the last full season we've seen. So I have a hard time seeing why you wouldn't want to take a shot at McKenzie at pick 234.
Yeah, I think I agree. And this sounds like a lot of the stuff that we were telling ourselves heading into 2020. Oh, like, he had 128 big league innings in 2021. It's like, if he could just get to 150, like it's still going to be really good. And he got to 191, which was like what
Insane.
nobody expected. It was insane. It was like that's close to the league leaders now. Like barely anybody gets 200 innings, right? Now, maybe that led to some of the injury issues the next year for him, but I mean, he has that in him. Like the old Ron Chandler adage, like once you show a skill, you own it. Like he's pitched a season where he started 30 games and threw 190 innings. Like he's capable of doing it despite that frame and how, fragile he looks. It's in him.
Yeah.
And, I think this is more, even less about the stuff. Like the stuff, like we know that the stuff is really good. The K rate has the potential to be really good. The swing strike rate, which I think is a good stat to look at in spring training. Like anytime that you look at a stat where the denominator is pitches, that's pretty good. Just because it's a more bigger sample in spring, and that's 15.1% in spring. So, I find it hard to, I guess, find a reason as to why not to take these guys. But I guess I'll throw you the harder question. Guys that are going similar ADPs that we just talked about. Flaherty's a little bit later, so we can kind of throw him out for now. But who would you rather have, Nestor Cortez or Tristan McKenzie in a vacuum? Assuming you can take both guys with one pick.
I think that it's definitely a floor ceiling trade off, but I think just in a vacuum, I think McKenzie, I'm more excited about just the swing and miss stuff. And honestly, like, every year there's kind of the buzzworthy data analysts across the industry, but IVB, we're hearing everything with that induced vertical break. And part of Nick's write up on him, not to just keep citing Nick here, but he says he has one of the best IVBs on that four seamer that of any pitcher. So like when you have that, you've got a slider that has insane whiffs, or curve as well. Like he just, we've seen it when it looks good. He's so fun to watch on the mound, and he's only 26 years old. So if I can get 160 innings out of Tristan McKenzie, I would take that versus like the floor I'm getting with Cortez. Cortez to me is, so that I got him in our WAF listener league, Steve, and like the staff that I paired him with, the front end has some stability with Eflin, but I went Michael King and Shane Boz in the middle there, and then Nick Pivetta, who, like, cross your fingers, but if he does the Nick Pivetta of old, suddenly I'm out of volume. And like
Yeah,
that's where I want
yeah.
Nestor Cortez to like save me as like an SP3 to
Mhm,
just get
mhm.
me some volume and stuff. But overall at that range, traditionally you are looking for the upside, and I think that's what Tristan McKenzie provides for sure.
Yeah, I think I would go McKenzie too. I'm a sucker for upside, but I guess
Yep.
we all are to an extent.
Well, more upside on the way. We're switching back to hitters, but we got it. We got another pitcher in our final group after we take our second ad break. We'll be right back after this. So, Steve, I wanted to start with another Yankee. Man, I'm out in Yankee land right now, but Austin Wells is a catcher that I've been loading up on. Usually, is my second catcher. Um, this guy is just red hot this spring, and I know with Trevino's injury, they were basically looking at somebody who could fill the short term, but he looks like he might be kind of running with it. Uh, Power has been incredible, and he should have the starting job. I know across three levels in the minors last year, he had 17 home runs in 86 games, and then had 4 home runs in 19 games. So the pop is definitely there, and honestly, the hit tool isn't bad. He's projected out at like a 250 average. So that late to get a guy who's 20 plus homers, 250 average, and with the Yankees, like this is exciting for me. I've prioritized him on some drafts, even over like a Danny Jansen, who's another late catcher I like. But talk to me about Austin Wells. Are you kind of drinking the Kool-Aid here?
Yeah, yeah. I think he is a great 2C target for NFBC leagues, and I even think that he could have the potential to be a 1C if you were in like a 15 team one catcher league sort of back end. Want to wait on the position totally. Um, I think the only question with him was the playing time, but I don't see really much of a reason for the Yankees not to play him that much. And roster resource has Yankees currently with 3 catchers on the roster, but that's not going to be the case. Like they're not going to carry um, um, Roedvert and Trevino. But did I miss a Trevino injury? Correct me
I
wrong
thought
there.
that's I
But
thought that was the window for Wells, but I might have that wrong. I'll look it up in the meantime here.
got it. But yeah, the reports about his defense have been good. Aaron Boone's just been praising it all spring, essentially. I think the reports from pitchers have been great that they like throwing to him. And I really don't think it's a question about the bat. Like he has all the tools to be more than good enough to, hit close to 250, 240 ish with a good pop, and that could be a really valuable catcher, because there's not many guys that are able to do that can actually catch in today's game. So, um,
I think Trevino was just behind because of a calf strain
got it,
on
got it.
starting spring, which does explain why he only has 5 at bats, whereas Wells has 23 at bats. But yeah, I mean, Austin Wells has a 1081 OPS, a 304 average in spring, and Trevino's just getting back into the swing of
It
things.
could be one of the things where they just want to like see as much as they can of him in spring, and it's sort of like, oops, it's Trevino's job. Like, sorry everybody. But if that's the case, you could always sort of move on in one catcher leagues and get on the catcher carousel, as my home league partner Rich likes to say. Just trying to add a catcher and streaming to the next one till you find someone that sticks. But I think it's worth a shot. And at worst, I think that he should be valuable in 2C leagues, even if Trevino does get more time than we would hope for, at least from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, it's let's see. Aaron Boone quoted, I think he's a really good catcher. I've been so impressed with how good of a catcher I think he's becoming. That's always been the question, right? Can he catch? There's no doubt in my mind he can. And not only that, I think he's good. His skill set now, receiving, blocking, throwing is all good. And the other stuff, that's an important part of the catching I think he's got. And I think he's going to hit. So, I mean, the way he's talking about him definitely sounds like there's a
Yeah.
spot here, at least
Yeah.
as like a tandem. So Boone said whoever joins Trevino is part of the catching tandem. There you go. It will likely be a split in playing time. Okay, well, but
Even
what
if it
catcher
even
is
if
it?
it is 50-50, right? It still should be good enough with his bat, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's good for where you're getting him. Um, and yeah, he's another one that got projected right now hitting ninth. So you got Juan Soto and Aaron Judge following up after him, which is not a bad thing at all. Um, Steve, talk to me about Reese Olson. This was one that kind of midsummer last year, we were we were with the industry on just being like blown away by the swing and miss stuff that he came out with. And then I don't know if it was from results or otherwise, but it seems like a lot of the hype had cooled off on Reese Olson. Um, that said, now we're looking in the ADP 285. We've talked about the Tigers, what they're doing with this whole project. The reports are that he's kind of beating out Mize for this fifth slot in the rotation. Um, which is it all just a question of if he had opportunity? Do we still love the stuff for Reese Olson? Because I know at one point he was like the belle of the ball for the free agent wire, and I just don't know what's changed. So for him to be going this late, I think is pretty good value. But what are your thoughts on Reese Olson?
I feel like Olsen was probably one of our most talked about players last year. I don't know, at least it felt like that. It
Yeah,
just seemed like he was always a guy that came up that had a few good starts, was interesting, and I think we sort of touted him as just more usable than his rostership was, or
20% swinging strike rate on the slider, and he was
yeah.
a slider first guy. So that's right. We were
The
talking about like
the
the Wasker
slider
and
is
Noah. Yeah.
is amazing. It's an amazing pitch. All the other stuff is a question, because the fastball, despite decent velocity, is not great. It got, good results, but the underlying numbers were pretty bad, and it's just not, great extension. The whiffs weren't great. Um, he does have a few other options, which sort of we always like. It's like if you have the options, like that just means there's more options to improve.
Hmm.
Um, and maybe there's one that could um, break out there. There was a bump in fastball usage towards the end of the year, which it may not be exactly what we want to see, but the slider was still up there at like basically the same percentage. There's also an improved changeup rate, which if you can add an off speed to that offering to pair with that elite slider, it's good. I mean, it's a small sample, but it did get decent whiffs as the year went on for the slider. So, for the changeup, which it's just another option. And when you have an elite pitch like that, like the slider that he locates so well, If there's just any bit of of a of an improvement in any of those pitches, there could be another level breakout. And if you look at all like the heat maps for all of his pitches, basically all of his pitches, but the four seam fastball are exactly where you want to see it. Like a slider's down and away. The sinker is on the inside corner, off the heart of the plate. The changeup is all down. It's just the fastball's red blob is just right in the middle of the plate. So
Yeah.
maybe it's not even as much as of a stuff question as is okay, let's change your fastball location a little bit. Let's elevate it a little bit more. And maybe that could be the key to unlocking it. But with someone that has a pitch as good as his slider, I'm sort of always interested in that. And think that there is a good opportunity. And it's just sort of another guy that's kind of going, totally overlooked. It's a 36% whiff rate on the changeup, which is still pretty good. It's a smaller sample, but he does throw it, more to lefties, but he still threw 100 of them to righties. 264 of them overall. So
Yeah, the changeup and the sinker both aren't bad. Like on his pitch list
he
page.
throws the sinker strictly to righties, so that's an option against righties.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
but and then more four seams to lefties, but and he's comfortable throwing. It's more sliders to righties too, but he's comfortable throwing it to lefties too. So there's some options here in this repertoire.
Yeah, it's like 3,000 RPMs on the slider, which is why it's so filthy. And that's pitching ninja, like you mentioned, but reasonable control as well. Sub 8% walk rate last year, over 100 innings. 24 years old. Like, yeah, this is just a great spot in the draft for a player like this. So, I mean, there were stretches here's the tweet. His last 7 starts mid-September last year, a 3.38 ERA, a 110 WHIP, 41 strikeouts in 37 innings. Like that's not pick 250 type of production right there. That's like a top 25 pitcher type of production. So I'm in. I am ashamed to admit I don't know that I have any shares. That's another one I got to check, but I guess that's next week's episode, Steve. We got to round out with a couple. I know you asked me a month or two back, Steve, how I felt about Victor Scott for the Cardinals. And my thought was that it was just way too crowded in the outfield to where there was no chance. But Newt Barr's got the lingering injury. Now all of a sudden our Tommy Edman as well is out. Our projected lineup's got Alec Burleson in there and Dylan Carlson in there. And I think with how good Victor Scott has been, and he's getting some praise in the clubhouse, there's just a possibility. Derek Gould, the classic beat writer, tweeted today about how Victor Scott might be. It was another guy's article that might be stealing a job out of camp, which would be so exciting because as we all know, for anyone who knows Victor Scott, this guy is an absolute speed demon. Probably has the ability to rip like 40 bases given the opportunity. So yeah, he's got 4 in 11 games. He's got 4 steals. He's hitting 367. He's got a triple, the 890 OPS. So like he's doing everything he can to try to win this job. So that with a little bit of opportunity from the injuries, I don't think, and this is way deep because the ADP is 515 as it should be because we have no idea on playing time and it could evaporate once, everybody's healthy. But for the deepest of deep leagues, I really like Victor Scott, Steve. So I had to bring him back in because you asked about him. Anything you want to add there? Do you want to round us out with who might be a new WAF staple this season?
No, I'll just add, I think that maybe this is like opportunity of Jackson Merrill before it was announced that he made the roster, right? Like I think if it's announced, if the Cardinals were going to Korea for these games and it was announced, Victor Scott's coming on the plane, whatever, like his ADP would shoot up probably close to where Merrill's is now, like pick 200. So I think that alone is reason to take him. even before this spring, he was really, really impressive at the Arizona Fall League. So he kind of shot up prospect list there and became sort of on the radar for a potential promotion at some point this year. But now with the injuries in the spring performance, it looks like he might be forcing their hand. And it seems like despite the Cardinals it seems like that they've had so many outfielders over the last few years, but also at the same time have had none. Um,
Yes.
Mostly due to Newt Barr's and Tyler O'Neill's injuries. Tommy Edman being forced to play the infield a bunch and then center field a bunch, and also being injured a bit. The Jordan Walker experience at third base, or
Bader,
yeah,
always on and off
Bader
the
always on and
field. Yep.
off. So maybe it seems like they're sort of starved for like an everyday star center fielder that they thought Dylan Carlson, I think, would eventually be. But maybe it's just Victor Scott that's going to be that for them, and maybe it's sooner rather than later.
Did I just say, by the way, that I have no shares of Reese Olson because I literally drafted him like 5 minutes before this podcast in our Raz
Oh,
Slam?
nice. I have a share too. I think I have him.
Okay, good. So we got some
Yeah,
skin in the game.
I think I have him in
Uh,
our listener league potentially.
okay, okay. Well, we got to round out here. We talked about Nando DeFino's
The
pitch
big
con
obligatory way
prediction.
that we end the show, we talk about Miguel Andujar.
We got to talk about Miguel Andujar because Nando predicted it. He said he was on it, and now guess what? We're riding the coattails, folks. Andujar for the Athletics, who could possibly block a guy who in the spring has a 406 average and a 1237 OPS with 4 homers and a steal in 11 games. All that and with no strikeouts to his name. This is Miguel Andujar. Steve, I know we waxed poetic last week about this kind of banter pick that, could he have a resurgence from the Yankee line we saw in like 2018? But now, are you taking it a little more serious? I think I'm going to put him on a queue in some of these deep leagues.
Yeah, and we got him in our draft and hold, right, in honor of Nando, talking about him
That's
before
right.
really
That's right.
anybody else. But if there's anyone that could put up this amazing spring line and not like make the team or somehow get blocked, it is Miguel Andujar. I know that happened more so when he was in New York and that loaded lineup from a few
Mm-hmm.
years back. But there's no reason why he shouldn't at least make the ace. He's currently on the bench. They can't even slide him into a starting role in Oakland there. But they got Abraham Toro at third.
Yeah,
Um,
unfortunately, JJ Bleday is having a
yeah,
pretty good
Bleday
spring.
and he's another guy that I think could have made this list. I really like JJ Bleday too. Seth Brown is a lefty, but they currently got him as the platoon guy with Seth Brown. Unfortunately for Andujar, it's the weak side of the platoon, but he does have no options left, so maybe there's a surprising send down or cut or trade for a guy with more flexibility that opens up a spot for Andujar. But he's definitely earned it, and he's sort of been earning it as this quad A player, like we joked last year, for a while. But he's done absolutely everything that he has been able to over the course of the spring training. So he does have 32 at bats, which is something that we like to look at too in spring. Like how many at bats are these giving these
Yeah.
guys? So they're giving them a real look, and he's given them no reason not to play him, let alone just make the team. And what else does Oakland have to lose there other than play and see what they have there, right? Like if Andujar, has sort of the 2018 season or is close to it, like that's a really good trade chip at the deadline that they picked up on waivers for free back in November from Pittsburgh. So shout out again to our boy Nando for this Andujar call. He's been absolutely killing it in spring.
Yeah, I'll be disappointed in the Raz Slam league that we're both in, Steve, if neither one of us walks away
Oh
with
yeah.
Andujar in the late
We
rounds.
gotta,
So,
we gotta, we
yeah,
gotta.
I'll throw him in the queue. All right, guys. Well, like we said, we're back on the weekly schedule, so very excited to have you guys with us. Even though keeping the voice down, the hoarse voice from early fatherhood here. But yeah, we'll be back next week talking players we got shares of. We're going to have baseball in the air. You guys can always reach out with any players you want us to weigh in on. We're on Twitter at WinsBuffPod. And yeah, after that, we've got our chalkboard episode, which is, the 4th year we'll be doing it, where we put a flag in the ground for our targets and our fades, and they have to either beat or fall behind their ADP by 20%. And we keep score all season. That's why it's kind of up on the chalkboard. It's in writing, and we'll have a guest on that show to talk through the picks. So very exciting rest of March. Couldn't be more pumped for the season, Steve. Going to have home league, which is saving the best for last. We'll have to talk about that a little bit without boring everyone out there, but super pumped, man. Any closing thoughts before we wrap here?
No, it's cool. Glad the first stream went well. I think says we got over 1,000 viewers right now, which is awesome. Yeah, there you go. Some celebratory fireworks there. We'll do a better job interacting as we get more and more used to this platform. Pick out some questions, do some live on air stuff like that. Work in some more graphics like we did today. So exciting stuff. Shout out to my buddy Rich. I'll throw this one question up there at the end. Roster resource fun fact: before it was on Fangraphs, had a wrestling tab that did rankings for wrestlers for WWE, which was we love roster resource because it was a great way to get all those depth charts. But for that crossover of wrestling fans and fantasy baseball enthusiasts, and I know there's a bunch of us, but shout out to Rich for recalling that roster resource was also dabbled in the wrestling game, which was amazing. Gotta ask the guys over there who run it if they ever did anything with that beyond that fun little Easter egg. Yeah.
Hey, tell Rich, if Rich is tuning in, I'm going to extend the invite, because we invited Steve to our home league fantasy road trip, which we do every year. We rent out like a creepy white panel van and drive around the Midwest. We want Steve to fly in and meet all my home league guys. Rich, get in the mix as well. You can bring Sal. Bring the squad.
Yeah,
Steve,
yeah. Our
Goon Squad. Your
Goon
Goon
Squad East. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah,
well, thanks guys for tuning in as always. You can find me on Twitter at Van_verified, and Steve is at Stav8818. But that wraps us up for episode 130. Hey, an early happy kind of opening day.
Yeah.
Soul opening series. And yeah, we've got
next time we talk, there's going to be live baseball. There'll be a game already completed, right? Week away.
We made it. Thanks for talking baseball with us, guys.
There you go. There's your comfort from Rich. Love it. All right. Thanks, guys. Later.